Alrighty, welcome back everybody. It's your main math man, Mr. Shank, coming to you live from Summit Academy. And in this video, we're going to be talking about solving by completing the square. And we're going to be switching from our standard form to our vertex form, doing a couple of inverse operations, and then getting x by itself. And we should be getting two different answers as we get these problems. But for this, our content learning objective is going to be we will analyze orally and in writing how to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square using the language of analysis. So, first part, what I want you to do is to match the standard form to the vertex form of the equation. And so this is kind of what we've been doing before, where we have been kind of graphing these out and being able to see which ones match up. So what I can do is, let's say, for example, I want to work with this one where it's x squared minus 4x plus 9. I can pull up the graphing calculator. I'm going to graph out the original equation. I say x squared minus 4x plus 9. And then I look at the graph and I see, okay, what is going to be my vertex? Well, my vertex is that lowest or highest point of it, of that curve. And I'm going to say it's going to be 2, 5. Well, if I look at right here, I can also say, hey, that has some of the numbers I need, and it should be the opposite of whatever the x value is in my vertex. But I can always graph it out to check. So I'm going to say, all right, graph out my new equation. So I have x minus 2, parentheses, squared. I'm going to say plus 5. And if you notice, it almost looks like the graph went away, but in actuality, it's just overlapping. So when the two equations are overlapping, that means they are equal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the standard one up here, and then I'm going to drag it, and then it should highlight once you are able to group those two together. So notice how those two are grouped together. So there's two down real easily. So let me try this one here. I'm going to say x squared minus 4x plus 15. Let's look at the vertex on this one. So the vertex is 2, 11. So I need to find where the 2, 11 is. I don't see it. But that's okay. I can find a different one. So let's kind of put that one on hold. So I'll put that to the side. Let's try this one. Let's try x squared minus 15x plus 3. So let's look at this one. I got a really low vertex on that one. That's that 7.5 and then the negative 53.25. So I can double check though. So I have x minus 7.5 parentheses squared minus 53.25. I'm always looking to see where they overlap. That way I know I'm good. All right, so those two go together. So I'm going to pair, there they are. I'll pair these two together. So there's those two. Let's see if we have any other matches. So let's say we have x squared minus 14x plus 1. So our vertex is here at 7 and negative 48. So we're going to say that those two go together. And then I guess these two are supposed to go together, but obviously that was not quite what we had. And again, I can kind of show why these two do not go together. So if let me hit the home button to go back to the home. There it is. I'm going to zoom out, and then let's say x minus 7 squared minus 34. Again, notice how those do not overlap because they're not the same equations at all. So we're going to leave those two unpaired. But these three can be paired together. Again, we're switching from that vertex, or excuse me, from the standard form. Again, I know it's standard form because when I'm looking at this equation, if I look at the exponents of the x's, I am in decreasing order. So I'm going from x squared to just x to the first power, and then x to the 0 power, which is why you don't see an x on that third term. I'm going from that standard form to the vertex form. Again, notice how it has it in parentheses. It should be the opposite of whatever your x value at your vertex is, and then in parentheses squared, and then plus or minus whatever your y value is in your vertex. Okay, so what we were talking about in previous days, we've been working with completing the square, solving equations, but what we worked with in lesson 13 is we talked about being able to identify each of those parts and then switch from standard form to vertex form, and then solve in vertex form. So for this one, I gave you guys an extra workspace here, so that way it's a little bit easier, and that way we can show our work. So for this one, it says solve by completing the square. So first, what we have to do is complete the square. So I'm going to say, okay, let me scroll down a little bit. I'm going to say, all right, my original equation. Let's see if we can get this here. Actually, give me 1 second. All right. So my original equation is going to be x squared plus 2x and then minus 2. That's still set equal to 0. So my first step is to identify what b is. So I'm going to say b for this one is going to be that number attached to our x value, or that x term. So I'm going to say b equals 2. And I'm going to say, well, what does that look like for our rest of our problem? So what I need to do, I'm going to use that poster on Schoology in case you forgot the steps on how to complete the square. But now I'm going to find b over 2, which is just 1, and then b over 2 squared, really simply, is just 1 squared, which is still just 1. So this one's a little bit weird just because of these values, but that's okay. And so now I'm going to add it to both sides. So I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and I have to keep it separate from these other terms. So I'm not going to actually add these two terms together, even though they're like terms. I'm going to keep them separate. So it's going to look something like this. I'm going to have x squared plus 2x plus 1, and then I'm going to bring down the rest of the equation. So minus 2 equals, and then I'm going to add the right side. So 0 plus 1 is just 1. Now I can regroup these. So I'm going to say, okay, in parentheses, kind of looks like this. And now I can kind of try to switch to my vertex form. So I'm going to say, okay, it's going to be x, and then plus or minus whatever b over 2 is. So I'm going to say plus 1 squared, and the rest of the problem. And then I can finally subtract whatever number I added to both sides. So same as I did up here, I'm now going to subtract. So I'm going to say subtract 1 from both sides because I need to have it set equal to 0. So this is going to be x plus 1 squared minus 3 equals 0. And this is going to be our vertex. It's going to be our vertex form. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to go to this workspace because now I need to be able to solve my vertex form. All right, so that was, again, these steps were complete the square. Let me try that again because that was kind of rough. Apologize for that. Square, it's been a minute since I've used this, oh God, apparently. All right, so now I'm going to take my vertex form and solve. So let me actually write up here. I'm going to do solve. Let's say solve, or solving. Let's just say solving vertex form. All right. So when I take that exact equation that I have down here, I'm going to say, all right, I have x plus 1 squared minus 3 still equal to 0. And so what I have to do is I have to use some inverse operations to get x by itself. So for this one, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I'm going to say plus 3 plus 3. And so I say x plus 1 squared equals 3. Key part now, I have to make sure I take the square root of both sides. Let me actually write that. So let me actually just type it. Let me see if the typing will works a little bit better. So let's try this out. Let me see. I'll say take square root of both sides. Sweet. So when I take the square root, it kind of looks like this. I'm going to take a square root left side and the right side. And this is a key part because this is how you get your two answers. When you take that square root of both sides, or if you take the square root of any number, you should get that positive and that negative number. Let me not say any number, any square root of a positive number. Let's say that specifically. Any square root of a positive number, I'm going to say it's going to be a positive answer and a negative answer. So it kind of looks like this. So when I rewrite it, it gets rid of the parentheses, gets rid of the exponent, because that's that inverse operation. So now I have x plus 1 equals, and I'm going to say plus and minus square root of 3. So even though the square root of 3, I can type it in a calculator, gives me this decimal here, that's okay. Instead of having to write out this super long decimal, we can just write square root of 3, and it will still work. So I'm just going to keep that to the side. All right, now we have to split our answers. So let me actually, I'm going to type a couple things here. So we said, let's say you get a positive and negative answer. And then we're going to say, let me actually move these two up. Let's do like right there. Does that work? Yeah. And then lastly, let me do in green. I'm going to say like this. It'll let me. There it is. Split. Nope. Cursor. There it is. Split answer into two equations. So what it looks like is like this. I'm going to split it down the middle. Draw a little squiggly line, kind of help break that apart. But I have my two equations. Again, it should be x plus 1 equals, and then we're going to have the positive and the negative side. All right, so it kind of looks like this. We're going to say x plus 1 equals, and I'm going to say negative square root of 3. And I'm going to say on my other side, I'm going to say x plus 1 equals positive square root of 3. So I need to have two different answers here. Even though this kind of looks almost identical, again, the main difference is those two signs. So this is how we get our two answers. Make sure you add the opposite to both sides, so that way it gets rid of the term next to your variable. So I'm going to say, since it's plus 1, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And I have to do it the whole way across. Be mindful though, and this is another important part, please make sure you do not put these two together. Again, that square root symbol, the square root symbol is a grouping symbol. That means we have to keep it separate from those other terms. So what it looks like is like this. I'm going to say x equals, because the ones cancel out, and I just have negative 1 minus square root of 3. So that's going to be one answer, like that. I say x equals negative 1 plus square root of 3. And there's my answer there. So there's my two answers. Again, you can check. Again, notice how I kept those two values separate. Let's try it out. So I'm going to type these in. Again, our plus sign, or our plus side, is going to be larger, so that's the one I need to type in first. So make sure you're typing in the larger side first. So I'm going to say, like I have here at the bottom, I'm going to type in at the top. I'm going to say negative 1 plus, and then for the square root symbol, you can use the keyboard, but I'm going to type it out simply. I'm going to say SQRT, and then 3. So there's one value, and then my other value is going to be negative 1 minus SQRT for square root 3. There's my two answers. Let's see if I get these right. So it does have the pop-up there, but what we're going to say though is, even though I have this little pop-up to kind of show if it's right or wrong, I want to prove to you guys that I know it's right, because on your test, you're not going to have a little pop-up thing. You're going to have only your graph and yourself for the test. So it looks like this. I'm going to say I can graph out my original equation. So our original equation, again, exactly as it looks, or you can type in your vertex form. Either way works, because they should be the same already. I'm going to say x squared plus 2x minus 2. Let's go look at our two values here. So we have negative 2.73, and we have positive 0.73. So notice how, again, those values line up with those two values that we got for answers. And so that way we know we're good. Moving on to the next one. Same kind of idea. I'm going to go a little bit quicker just to be able to make sure I get all these in. But it looks like this. I say, okay, first step, get my values written. Still set equal to 0 because we're going to be solving. But let's identify what b is. So we're going to say b equals negative 16. That means b over 2 equals, and actually let me show you guys how to use the calculator for this part, because what I can do is I can type on the side here exactly what I need. So I'm able to identify that. Make sure you're able to do this part first. I'm able to identify, hey, that number or that value attached to the variable just x is going to be labeled our coefficient b. So we're going to say b equals negative 16. So now that you defined it, then we can use it in the calculator. So now I could say b over 2 is negative 8. And then I can say, in parentheses, b over 2 squared. So b over 2, and then parentheses, exponent 2 is going to be 64. So let me actually write that down so that way I have it. So I'm going to say b over 2 is negative 8. Let me actually switch back on colors here. So I'm going to say negative 8, and in parentheses, b over 2 squared is 64. All right. So again, if you have any troubles typing any of this stuff in, please let me know. I want to make sure that you guys are able to use that powerful tool. All right. So now, let's see. Let me scroll down a little bit more. There it is. All right. So let's say now we have this. So our first step is to add it to both sides. So I'm going to say plus 64 to both sides. So we have to add this number to both sides. Then we're going to say, all right, group it together. Again, put that number right after that x term. So I'm going to say x squared minus 16x plus 64 plus 5, because I need the rest of the equation, equals 64. This is helpful because now we can group these together. So I'm going to say, all right, first three terms group together. And we're going to switch it from standard form to vertex form. So now I have x, and then I'm going to have b over 2 here. So I'm going to say minus 8. Again, we get that from this term b over 2. And so we're going to say x minus 8 squared and plus 5 equals 64. So notice how the only thing that changed, this is a really key part here, that's why I put those parentheses around it. I want to make sure that those are all together. So I go from x squared minus 16 plus 64, that's the same as x minus 8 squared. Last step, subtract both sides by 64 because we have to have it set equal to 0. So I'm saying minus 64 to both sides. So we're going to say all together, we're going to say x minus 8 squared minus, what was that, 59? Yeah. Just double checking. Negative 59 equals 0. And this is our vertex form. All right. So now we can, once we have our vertex form, we can shift to the new workspace. And we're going to say, all right, I have x minus 8 squared minus 59 equals 0. I'm going to use those inverse operations to get x by itself. So I'm going to add 59 to both sides. And then I say, all right, I have x minus 8 squared equals 59. Take that square root. Take that square root of both sides. Let's try that again. Boom, and one more time. Jesus. There it is. Okay. Take square root of both sides. This is where you get your two different answers. So I'm going to say the parentheses are gone, actually. And so I'm going to say x minus 8 equals plus or minus square root 59. Be able to split your work into two spaces. So that way we get two different answers. I'm going to say x minus 8 equals negative square root 59. And on the right side, I have x minus 8 equals, let's try that writing that again, 8 equals positive square root 59. All right. Gonna make sure you're seeing again the two main differences between those two are the plus and minus sign. So that should be the only difference between those two. All right, so now I can do the one same step the whole way across. Since it has minus 8, I'm going to do the opposite, so I'm going to add 8 to both sides. Again, keep it separate from that grouping symbol of that radical symbol, that square root symbol. So I'm going to add 8 to both sides, to all sides, I should say, since we have two of the similar equations. But I'm going to say x equals 8 minus square root 59, and then x equals 8 plus square root. Let me write that a little bit better. Oh, it's undoing on this side too. Interesting. I was wondering what was going on. Okay, x equals, what was it, 8 plus square root of 59. So there are two answers for this one. You can make sure, oh God, make sure you can type them in for yourself. Close enough. But let's type them in up here. Again, the plus sign is the larger one. Scroll down just a little bit. So I'm going to say 8 plus SQRT 59 and 8 minus SQRT 59. So let's try it out, make sure. And yeah, looks good. Moving on, I'm going to do a couple more here. I want to make sure I get through all of them so that way we have all of them. But it looks like this. Let's scroll down a little bit. So we got x squared minus 5x plus 1. So we're going to have a decimal for this one. That's okay, but that's good though, because that way you guys see an example with the decimal, because sometimes it freaks people out, but I can assure you it's the same exact steps. So we're going to say b equals, actually I do need to use a calculator for this. Let's try this out. I'm going to say b equals, again that term attached to my x is going to be negative 5. So I say negative 5, and then I say b over 2 is going to be negative 2.5. So let me write this down. So b equals negative 5, b over 2 equals negative 2.5. And then I need this entire thing squared. So I have b over 2 exponent 2. Oh, try again. Make sure the exponent's in the right space. Try this again. And shift 6 exponent. Okay. So now it's going to say b over 2 in parentheses squared equals 6.25. So normally when you square whatever number you get, you should end up with a positive answer, because that way it's going to be able to cancel it out. So this is what I'm going to add to both sides. I'm going to get rid of this. So I'm going to say add it to both sides. So I'm going to say plus 6.25 plus 6.25. Make sure those get grouped together. So I have x squared minus 5x plus 6.25 plus 1 equals 6.25. Group those first three terms together. So I'm going to have these three together. I'm going to rewrite it in vertex form. So I have x plus my b over 2. So I'm going to say minus 2.5 squared plus 1 equals 6.25. And make sure you subtract by the number you added, so that way it is still the same equation. So I'm going to say minus 6.25 to both sides. Get our final vertex form, or our final form. So I have x minus 2.5 squared equals, nope, sorry, I think someone's wrong there, minus 5.25, which is equal to 0. Okay, that's going to be our vertex form. Now we can take, I'll try that one again, form, there it is. Now we can take this right side, and we're going to use the same equation. So I'm going to say, all right, I have x minus 2.5. Actually, let me slow down. Let me make sure that my, oh, it's also undoing still. Okay, let's undo here. Let me graph it out, because maybe I'm a little unsure of my answers here. I want to make sure I don't do too much work without checking it first. So I'm going to say x squared minus 5x plus 1. So I'm going to graph out my original equation, see if my vertex form is the same. So I'm going to say x minus 2.5 in parentheses squared minus 5.25. I can check to make sure they overlap. Or another way too is, if you want more of an exact answer, look at your vertex. So my vertex for the green is 2.5 comma negative 5.25, and then my vertex for the orange or the yellow is the same amount. So again, even if they're overlapping, you can kind of see and make sure that the vertex is the same. But we are good on these two, so that way I know I'm good. Actually, I do need to come back to that here in a second, so that's actually fine. I'll copy and paste the original amount. Anyways, so let's use that vertex form. So I have parentheses x minus 2.5 squared minus 5, I keep forgetting that, minus 5.25 equals 0. So we're going to add that number to both sides. You can always add the opposite. So if it has subtraction, make sure you are adding. So now we have x minus 2.5 squared equals 5.25. Now what we can do, take that square root. So I'm going to say take the square root, both sides. I would suggest leaving it. If you want to try to see if there's a square root for it, you can, but I would suggest leaving it without with the square root symbol. So now it's going to look like this. I'm going to say x minus 2.5 equals plus or minus square root of 5.25. Split your answer into two spaces, something like this. And we're going to say x minus 2.5 equals negative square root 5.25. Just ran out of space there. And then on the right side, we have x minus 2.5 equals positive square root of 5.25. One step the whole way across. Since we are subtracting, I'm going to add. I'm going to add the number it tells me to add right there. So I'm going to say plus 2.5 to all those sides. All right, so let's see if I can squeeze this in here. But I say x equals, a little bit smaller actually. Say x, that small. And close enough. X equals, we're going to say 2.5 minus square root 5.25. This could be one answer. And the other answer is x equals 2.5 plus square root of that decimal. All right, so let's try typing them in. Let's check to see if we're right. So I'm going to say first number is the plus sign, or plus side, I should say. So 2.5 plus SQRT 5.25. So get that decimal. And then the second side is 2.5 minus SQRT 5.25. So try and submit on these. Yeah, it's good to go. Also too, you can check using your graph. So I'm going to copy and paste my original graph in. Again, make sure that it doesn't have any extra stuff. So if I highlight it like this, or let's say if I highlight it like this and I hit Control C, sometimes it doesn't even copy, but other times notice how it has that little apostrophe on either side of it. That's because it's copied wrong. So if you want to, you can just copy or get rid of those like so. But what we want to do is we want to just highlight from the left side of the equal sign. So notice how it's a different color, and it only highlights that amount. And so now we're good. So let's look at the two values that we have. To the far right is our first answer, 4.79, looks good, and our left answer is 0.208. And so we're good. Alrighty, so now that we're kind of getting a little hang of it, what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to try this out. So I'm gonna write this down for you. I'm gonna say your turn, or to turn, no. But what I want you to do is I want you to I want you to pause the video and pick either slide 6, 7, or 8 to do on your own, and then make sure you can check yourself for that. But then I also want you to make sure that you are finishing that X ticket. Make sure your answers work out. Make sure you can graph out your original equation exactly as it looks, so that way you can see what the two answers should be. But you should be able to graph it out. Again, zoom out if you need to. Click on those two x-intercepts. Make sure the far right one is in first and the far left one is in last. But just make sure you can check those out. Again, follow those steps from before on the previous slides. Again, make sure you can ask questions. And as always, super slam that subscribe button.